All right, we're going to talk about special cases. Special cases, you say, what's a special case, Mr. Craig? Well, it's where I have 2 points and I have the slope, but the problem is, if you notice, one of my points is a variable. So you say, well, how do we go about this? Well, I know how to find the rate of change. The rate of change is the change in the x and the change in the y over the change in the x, right? And I know what my rate of change equals. I just got to find the missing part. So let me show you how this works. So I know that the change in x right here from 4 to 2 is minus 2. Because I put this point here and I put this point here. But I don't know what the change in y is. So I'm going to keep this as a change in y. And so I'm going to come back to here. So I know my change in x is negative 2. My change in y is I don't know. But I do know what m is. M is 2. So I'm going to put a 2 here. And then I go, okay, well, I can actually do a couple things. I can either put 2 as a proportion and figure out how I get from here to here, or I can just solve for it. So let me show you both ways. If I put 2 as a proportion, so 2 over 1, I can say, okay, what times 1 will make negative 2? And I say, oh, negative 2 times 1 will make negative 2. So let's try this. What's 2 times negative 2? Because what you do at the top, you have to do at the bottom, or vice versa. 2 times negative 2 would give me negative 4. So that would mean that the change in y must be negative 4. Well, that would mean I come over here and I put a negative 4 in here. Let's see, what's negative 4 minus 4? Oh, that would make negative 8. So this becomes negative 8, so I know that n equals negative 8. Now let's just check that. If I did that, if this was 4 to 2, that's minus 2, and negative 4 to negative 8 is minus 4. Negative 4 over negative 2 is, simplifies down to 2, and that's my slope. So n equals 8. Now, really quickly going back to this, for those of you who are confused by this, I said m, which we said is 2, that's where we got from that from, equals the change in y, which is unknown originally, and the change in x we said is negative 2. Another way I can do this, if I want to get the change in y alone, I could get rid of the divide by negative 2. And how do I get rid of divide by negative 2? Because I multiply by negative 2. And that'll simplify this to 1. I get the change in y equals to negative 4. But again, that's not my answer. That just tells me what my change in y is. My change in y is negative 4. And now I got to put negative 4 minus 4, which gives me my n, which is going to be negative 8. That was really fast. Let's try another one. All right, special cases. There we go. So again, this is a special case. The reason why this is a special case is because I don't know what y is. It's telling me that I have a slope of 1/2, and I have these 2 points, but I don't know what the y value of this point is. That's what makes it a special case. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to set up the rate of change, x and y. So I know this is 6 and negative 1. I know this is 14, but I do not know what my y value is. So the goal here is to find out what y equals. So to do that, in the past, we've defined slope. We've done change in y over change in x. So I need to find the change in the y over the change in the x. So the problem, though, here is that I don't know what this is because I don't know what this value is. So we're just going to call this change in y because I don't know what that is. I'm going to find out what that is in a second, what that actually has to equal. But over here, to get the change in x, I just say what's from 6 to 14 is increasing by 8. So it's plus 8, right? So now, you say, well, how does that help me? Well, I have this equation, m equals the change in y over the change in x. And in this special case, I already know what m equals. It equals 1/2. So I can put a 1/2 in for m, equals the change in y, which I don't know, I want to find that out, over the change in x, which we said was 8. So I have one missing variable. So I have 2 ways I can solve this. The first way, again, is I can just say, here is the variable I'm trying to solve for. That makes this the coefficient. How do I get rid of divide by 8? Well, I'm going to times by 8. If I do it to one side of the equation, I have to do it to the other. And 8 over 8 reduces to 1, so I get the change in y equals 8 times 1/2 is going to be 4. So that's my change in y. But really quickly, if you didn't like doing it that way, if we did the exact same problem again, in the 7th grade, I believe you do something called ratios and proportions, which is saying if there's an equal sign here, It's saying 1/2 equals blank over 8. And you're basically saying, what can I multiply the top and the bottom by to get it to equal to this? Well, I say, okay, well 2 times what makes 8? Oh, times 4. So if I do it to the bottom, I have to do it to the top. 1 times 4. That means this is going to be 4. In both cases, I still get the answer 4. It depends on what's easier for you. This will make more sense when we're looking for x's. So change in y equals 4. Some people say, oh, I'm done, that's the answer. But that's only half of it. That only tells me what the change in y equals. It's 4. But to find what the missing value is, I have to take -1, which is the first point, and I'm going to have to add 4 to it. So -1 plus 4 means my y value has to be 3. And how do I verify if this is true or not? I'm going to go in there and pretend that this is a 3 now. Let's take a look. -1 to 3 is plus 4. 6 to 14 is 8. And 4 over 8 reduces to 1/2. So we got the correct answer. Let's try another one. Okay, so this one, go ahead and try it. All right, so this one's tricky because instead of the y being gone, we are missing the x. But the same rules apply. I'm going to try making a table. Here's my x and here's my y. I get -2, 0, and my next one is n and 12. So we know to find the slope, it's the change in y over the change in x. So I want to find what's my change in y, what's my change in x. So in this case, I can find my change in y. 0 to 12 is increasing by 12, so it's plus 12. But a change in x, I don't know. Because -2 to what makes n? I don't know. So I'm going to put this just as the change in x. I don't know what it is. But I can find it because I'm not just I not just have a missing point and nothing else. I know that this point to this point needs to equal 2. So I can take this equation, which is to find the slope, it's the change in y or the change in x, and say, okay, let's plug it in. The change in y is 12. The change in x is I don't know. And that equals 2. So this is where I was saying where it gets more difficult, because the problem with this is that the change I'm looking for is in the denominator. And when we've solved equations, if the variable's in the denominator, we have to get it out of the bottom. So if you want to do it with just one variable, the idea here is I got to get the variable out of the denominator. So I'm going to multiply both sides by the change in x times the change in x, right? And change in x over change in x equals 1, because I don't care what it is, and that gives me 12, equals 2 times the change in x, because I'm doing 2 times the change in x. Now if I want to get the change in x alone, I divide by 2 and divide by 2. It's 1, so my change in my x equals 6. That's kind of scary. This is where I was telling you where you might want to try doing this with a proportion, if you remember proportions. Remember, we said 2 equals 12 over the change in x. Well, I know that 2 is the same as 2 over 1, yes? If I can do proportional reasoning, I know that this has to equal that because of this equal sign. So I can say, okay, well, what times 2 will give me 12? I say, oh, it's times 6. Cool. Well, let's check. 1 times what will give, if I multiply that by 6, what's 1 times 6? The change in x equals 6. Same thing I got here, but I think when we did proportions, it ends up being a little bit easier. But again, the biggest problem here is students think, oh, I'm done, 6. No, 6 isn't the answer. 6 is just what the change is. I can take my x value, and I can say my x value equals 6, right? But I still have to figure out what n is. And what I have to do there then is say, okay, -2, since this is a 6, we assume it's positive. So we say -2 plus 6, what does that equal? In this case, it says n equals 4. Now let's just verify if that's true. If I put a 4 in here, from 0 to 12 gives me 12. From -2 to 4 gives me 6. And 12 over 6 will equal 2. I have my answer, so my n equals 4. Remember, this just gives me my change in, this gives me my answer. And if you're doing this, for instance, for a level 4, we're going to want to see all this work. We don't want to just see the answer. We need to see how you got here. You have to convey your thoughts and idea. We're looking for this for half credit, and for full credit, we're looking for the whole thing. So let's try one more. Boom, same thing. I got, go ahead and try it. All right, cool. Again, I don't know what my x is. That's my issue. I don't know what my x is, but I set it up the exact same way as I set it up last time. I have an x and y, and I put the points I have. I have 5 and 6, x and y, n and 2, x and y. And again, to find the slope, it's the change in y over the change in x. So I want the change in y over the change in x, because I know what that equals. Well, I can tell you what this is because I can just look. 6 to 2 is minus 4. But 5 to n, I don't know what that is, so I'm just going to call it the change in x. That's what I'm looking for. I need to know that so I can find this. So I go, okay, I have this proportion. That's this. The change in y is negative 4 over the change in x, which I don't know. But I do know that m, what this whole thing equals, is negative 4. Okay, so I know it equals negative 4. Again, if you solve it the way you've solved stuff in the past, you would have to go, okay, here's the variable. Oh, it's in the denominator. So I'm going to multiply by the change in x, multiply by the change in, that's a horrible change in x. This simplifies to 1. I get negative 4 equals negative 4 times the change in x. And then to get x alone, divide by negative 4, divide by negative 4. And that gives me the change in x equals negative divided by negative is a positive, and 4 divided by 4 is 1. Or, like I told you before, I really recommend that when you're doing these types of problems, you set up a proportion. That's where you say the change in y, which is negative 4, over the change in x, equals negative 4. But I can set negative 4 as a fraction. It's negative 4 over 1. And now because of proportions and ratios, I know that because of this equal sign, they have to be equal to each other. So I say, okay, negative 4 times what gives me negative 4? And it's not times 0, because 0 times anything is 0. But I can multiply it by 1. Negative 4 times 1 will give me negative 4. Let's check this. Then what is 1 times 1? Oh, change in x has to be 1. That's what we got. I think this is a lot easier than doing it this way. I really suggest the proportion, but you can do it either way. But again, people think, oh, I'm done. But no, that's just the change in x. The change in x I now know should be 1, which means plus 1. Well, 5 plus 1 is what? 6. So n has to equal 6. And how do we check? Well, we put a 6 in here, we look. 5 plus 1, 6. 6 minus 4 is 2. Negative 4 over 1 is negative 4. So I got the correct answer. And that's it. I think that's the last one. Let me just check. Oh, I got one more. Go ahead and try to do it. Excellent. Again, we check. We say we're missing a variable. This time we're missing the y. I want to go back to one of those. Same thing, x and y. I'm going to put my my points in there. That is a 9, not an 8. And I want to find the change in y over the change in x. And in this case, again, I look and I say, well, I can't find this because I don't know what n is, so I'm just going to call this the change in y. But I do know what x is. 3 plus what makes 9 plus 6, so my change in x is 6. So now I know this proportion. I know the change in y over 6 equals my m. And what does m equal? M equals 1/2, so I put 1/2, right? And again, I'm going to go just straight proportion this time. I know 1/2 equals change in y over 6. And I'm just going to say, what can I multiply that 2 by to get 6? Well, 2 times 3 will give me 6. And then I say, okay, if I do it to the bottom, I have to do it to the top to keep it proportional. And 1 times 3 gives me 3, so the change in y should equal 3. But if you don't like doing it that way, really quick, I could do the same exact problem. Change in y over 6. If I'm trying to solve for y, I want to get y alone. I'm like, okay, it's being divided by 6. How do I get rid of divided by 6? I multiply by 6, multiply by 6. 6 over 6 is 1. The change in y equals 6 times 1/2 is 3. In both cases, we got 3. I prefer to do proportions because it doesn't matter if you have an x or a y, it works easier. But this way, some people like to work it out. But I'm still not done. Again, that's only half of it. I know what my change in y has to be 3, but it does not give me my answer. To find that, I have to plug it back in and say 2 plus 3 means n has to equal 5. And then to verify that, I'll substitute 5 in and say 2 plus 3, that's 5. And 3 plus 6 is 9. And 3 over 6 reduces to 1/2. That's the correct answer, and you've got it. Hopefully that'll help you. Make sure you show your work. If this was a level 4, you'd have to show all your work. Good luck.